I took a few notes because I've been around him for about 20 years. I own a company that's called Crew Advisors, and I've had the opportunity to advise Brent for about 22 years or so. But after ZZ Top, Brent made a major life change. He served a mission in England. Then he came back and he got into cars. He was the top BMW salesman. And then he had an opportunity to work for a Toyota dealership and start to take it over. And in 1992, it was the worst by performance, by customer satisfaction, Toyota dealership in the entire United States. In a 2-year period of time, he turned it around and it was awarded the President's Award for the best customer satisfaction. I mean, think about that turnaround in just a 2-year period of time. In 2004, Ernst & Young nominated him as Entrepreneur of the Year for the state of Utah. He became the #1 volume dealer of all dealerships in all of Utah, even though he's in little tiny Orem, Utah. So people would actually drive past all those other Toyota dealerships down to his dealership because they really literally bent over backwards. He was Time Magazine's State of Utah Entrepreneur of the Year. And then what I love is he wanted to give back. So in Orem, he started and helped with the Provo School District Foundation, raised over $3 million to help students between the ages of kindergarten and seniors with their struggles in education. But what I really appreciate most about Brent and Melissa is that wherever I've seen them, they're generous. He loves to give back. He's a great storyteller. He's a dear friend, and I'm so glad that you would come and share this. Brent, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. I'd have a place to set it, my little bullet points. Okay. So, first off, thank you all for coming this evening. I appreciate you being here. I'm humbled that so many of you decided to take time on this kind of a day. Yeah, I mean, you'd probably rather be out there. So I'll do my very best to make this worthwhile for you. I was the youngest of 7 children, 5 girls, and then 2 boys, and I'm the very youngest, kind of like having 5 older mothers, you know. But anyway, youngest of 7 children. I started playing guitar when I was 6 years old. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the music part of it, but the guitar thing ended up being a big part of my life. And I did my first big concert at 16. I went professional at 15, and then did a record at 17, and ended up opening with ZZ Top, which at the time was one of the biggest bands out. And whoops, we'll turn that off, and there we go. Anyway, and it was a really, really life-changing moment for me, because at 17, having just come off of a really cool experience. I mean, you got to appreciate, if you're in high school, going to Brighton High School in Salt Lake City, and all your friends are going to see ZZ Top at the Salt Palace tonight, and you happen to be the opening act, that's a cool moment. You're not the high school quarterback, but you're pretty darn close, you know. And I was feeling pretty good until the next morning, when the Salt Lake Tribune, back in the day when newspapers mattered, this would be the equivalent of, you know, a review or something like that going, you know, today. But so the next morning, the Salt Lake Tribune does a review of the concert, and I want to read you what they said. I have it hanging on my wall at home. It says, Roadwork, a Salt Lake band consisting of Brent Brown guitar, Sean Halliday bass, and Kevin Freebaron drums, opened the concert with a 25-minute set. Not bad, but not distinctive, unless you enjoy watching Brown play the guitar with his teeth. So that was one of my trademark sort of things, is I would play the guitar with my teeth. Okay, at 17 years old, I didn't even know what the word distinctive meant. I remember reading the article going, what in the world are they saying? And then I looked it up, and I realized that what they were saying is that we weren't bad. In other words, we were a decent band, but we weren't distinctive. And I said to myself, that's the last time in my life that I will do anything and not be distinctive. I will not spend the time and energy that it takes to get to that stage or whatever other stage and not do something that stands out from the crowd. That might be the most important lesson that I could give you tonight, and you could almost kind of pack up and go home now, but you'd miss some good stuff. But anyway, I'm going to be coming back to that theme again and again. I then later decided to make a life shift and go on an LDS mission to England. I took a whole lot of the communication skills that I had gained, being in the band and all that stuff, and went out, and now here I was knocking on doors and talking to people, and had a tremendous amount of success, like not normal by any means. And my mission president, he said, man, you have a gift, but I'm not sure you really understand what it is. And then he drew on this piece of paper, he drew an A, and then some parentheses with an arrow, and then a B. He said, what you do better than almost anybody I've seen is you move people from point A to point B. It's this part in the parentheses. That's what you're really good at. And he said, you should spend the rest of your life doing that. Well, I was the son of a dentist. And I thought, since I had given up on the rock and roll thing because it got me in so much trouble, I thought that, well, maybe I'll go home and become like a dental lab technician. Well, when I told my mission president that that was my plan, he laughed. He literally laughed at me. He said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You need to go home and sell. You need to go home and move people from point A to point B. And I said, well, how would I do that? He said, just do what you're doing already. And so I went home and I started selling. I ended up in the car business after a period of time in real estate. I had gone down, I had done real estate here in Utah, while my mission president, who was he was the founder of Ivory Homes. Maybe you've heard of that. But anyway, so I worked for him for a little while, and then he went off to do a different thing, and I decided to move to Texas, where a lot of my family members were, and went down there planning on doing real estate, and they didn't honor my license. There was it's called reciprocity between states. So Texas was going to require that I live in Utah. Texas was going to require that I live in Texas for 2 months before they'd give me a license. Well, as a young kid, just having had our first baby, I didn't have 2 months of money saved up. So I needed to work. And I tried construction in the middle of the summer in Texas. That was not a great idea. That lasted about a week, and I thought I was going to die. And then I responded to an ad to sell cars at a Volkswagen dealership. It was a used car salesman at a Volkswagen dealership. Now, this isn't the kind of thing you go home and say, gee, Mom and Dad, I'm going to be a used car salesman at a Volkswagen dealership. Oh, son, that is great. That's kind of, they look at you and go, what? So I get there, and I put on my best suit, and the guy says, I think you're probably a little too polished. You'd be better for new car sales. I said, well, do you have one of those positions? He's like, no, we don't. I thought, oh, great. That's a nice way to kind of... Anyway, 2 days later, they called me back. I came back, and they gave me the job on the spot and gave me a car to drive. I was like, whoa, you got to be kidding me. The first month, I was their top salesperson. The second month, I broke the dealership's all-time record. The third month, I broke that record by even more. The fourth month, I broke it again by even more. And the local BMW dealership then called me. Said, hey, we understand you do this pretty well. If you come over here, we'll give you a BMW to drive. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm like, I'm on it. Went over, sold BMWs for a couple of months. The Volkswagen dealership calls me back and said, we just got the Jaguar franchise. If you'll come back, we'll let you sell Jaguars, and we'll give you a Jaguar to drive, and we'll pay for all your gas. I'm like, great. So, for the first while, it was all about the car. Anyway, I was doing my best during that time period to just try to be distinctive, to try to be different. It was at a time when all the salesmen, they just looked like really sleazy guys that you wouldn't really want to do business with. And I was going in dressed in a suit with a tie, and I had braces on my teeth. And I would tell people, look, if you can't remember my name, just remember the braces. And I would give them a first-class treatment like they hadn't seen anywhere else. And then I would follow up and call them afterward and keep calling with different ideas and different things that we might have received and whatever, trying to give them a different experience than what they were getting elsewhere. As a result, I became one of the top 5 Jaguar salespeople in the United States. And it kicked my career off. I then got the phone call to come up to Utah and start up a new franchise that had just come in. Some of you might remember the little Suzuki Jeeps. You've seen some of those. They were called Samurais, Suzuki Samurais. And I remember taking that over and thinking, okay, what do we do? We talked a little bit in a dinner that we had before this about marketing. This was my first real, okay, how do I market distinctively? Going back to that ZZ Top concert review, how do I market this distinctively? What I came up with was that these little miniature Jeeps were fun. So we weren't selling cars, we were selling fun. And so I shifted all of the marketing to, do you want a boring car or do you want something fun? We took it one step further. We brought in old Buicks and old ugly Chevrolets. And every time a customer would come in, we'd hand them a sledgehammer and let them take a hit at it. And by the time it was just beat to a pulp, we'd have all of our salespeople with sledgehammers standing on top of this car, beating the tar out of it, and we'd have a photographer taking pictures. And we did that in our marketing. And we said, we're here to get rid of boring cars. Come and have fun and buy a Suzuki. Well, we started in business. It was 1986 on April 15th, tax day. Your favorite day, James. Yeah. We started April 15th. So we missed the first 3.5 months of 1986 and still ended the year 8th in the nation in sales. For 6 of the 8.5 months that we were in business, we were number 1 in the United States. I also got to thinking about it and thought, they have this big Days of 47 parade. Craig, you know about it. You've done a float for it. And I thought, that parade goes right in front of our dealership. So what do? We put together a contest. We put one of those little Suzuki Samurais right out there, right in front of the dealership, right where the parade passed right by it, and gave 24 people the opportunity to put their hand on it, and whoever dropped last won the car. We'd give them a 5-minute break every hour. And lo and behold, if they didn't last for almost 2 days, hand on that car and national news, because all the news people were there to do the parade anyway. So why not? You got all these crazy people with their hands on this little Suzuki Samurai. National news, everybody knew about us, and we just knocked it out of the park. So again, I come back to this thing of saying, how willing are you to think outside the box and be distinctive enough that people go, oh my gosh, that sure is different than everything else we've seen. Because the world doesn't have place for average. They don't recognize you. They only recognize people who are out there really pushing and trying to do something different, even though, for instance, as a Toyota dealer, there were 8 Toyota dealerships in Utah. We were one of 8. How do you stand out from that crowd when all of them are selling the exact same product for the exact same price on the window? But the point is, you better figure out a way. You've got to be distinctive. I later became the manager of the Stephen Wade Auto Group and learned how, in that situation, to manage multiple dealerships. It was a key point for my career where I learned how to not just do one, but how to do several of them, but most importantly, how to make that manufacturer, each one of them at the same time I was running 6 different dealerships, and each time making the manufacturer feel like they were my most important one. And it was a little bit of a tap dance that you did, but that's where I got real familiar with that, and it helped me when I then went forward and became the manager of all the Rick Warner dealerships in Utah County that included Toyota. And so this was my first involvement with Toyota that ended up being a career-long relationship that I had with them. I ended up buying the Toyota dealership, as James said, and well, let's start with when I became the manager of it. It literally was documented last place in the United States in customer satisfaction. I remember in my first week or so, I got a letter from Toyota. It was almost like one of those hate letters where they say, you know, you are last place in the U.S., and what are you going to do about it? We need a plan, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, well, there's nowhere to go but up. So here we go. And we just simply started doing things that nobody had done. Back then, television advertising was a big thing. And cell phones were still relatively new. I know that sounds crazy, but cell phones were basically not even 10 years new, you know. And so I remember my very first TV ad that I did of pulling my cell phone out of my pocket. It was one of those flip phones. Pulling it out and holding it like this, and then in big letters across the bottom of the screen was my cell phone number. And I said, I'm Brent Brown. If you have a problem, call me. And, you know, and so that they knew if they were going to be my customer, that they weren't just going to fall into some, you know, cesspool. I mean, I was going to take care of them. As time went on, I ended up buying that Toyota dealership, and then subsequently ended up buying 9 more dealerships and having a total of 10. And then in 2008, I never had partners in Toyota, but I had a couple of partners in some of the other dealerships. And in 2008, I came up with all the money I could get of my own, all the money I could borrow, and I bought out my partners. And I was like, yes! All right, now I've got it all myself. That was, let's see, I bought the first one out in early 2008, the other one out in middle 2008. James, our financial guy, what happened in the latter part of 2008? The Great Recession. And all I had done was bought myself the opportunity to ride that mean horse all by myself. No partners to share those losses. All of a sudden, instead of it being profit, it was losses. And I learned real quickly that you have to make quick and decisive moves to be able to stay alive. I remember selling personal assets. I had a collection of guitars that was one of the best in the country. Multi-million-dollar collection of guitars, and I remember selling those so that I could make payroll at the dealership, and it was just like, you know. But you do what you have to do to survive if you decide that you're going to be a business owner. The other thing that I mentioned to some of the people earlier is that one of the things that we did that was really unusual was that we continued to advertise and market right through the depths of the recession. When all of my competitors were backing away and not spending money because they were kind of battening down the hatches and hiding and trying to wait it out, I kept advertising and kept marketing. I had read some information that indicated that it was quite common that leadership in a segment would change in a downturn. So in other words, if you're like a mid-size company and this huge company, and that in a downturn, very oftentimes, the huge company won't perform as well. A small company will come up and take them over, and then they hold it for a long time. Well, we proved that to be the case. In the middle of the recession, we were just an average size, kind of middle of the road. The recession ended in roughly 2012. By 2016, we became the number one volume auto dealership in Utah. Not just the number one volume Toyota dealership, but the number one volume dealership of any brand. It had never happened outside of the Salt Lake Valley prior to that. And we held that position for quite some time. Then, an interesting thing happened then. A few years later, I decided to sort of semi-retire and put my focus on just one dealership. It's interesting, and that dealership was the Toyota dealership. And it's interesting how this is a really good case study and something that I hope you'll remember from tonight's remarks. Sometimes you can get too fragmented. You can get going on so many different projects that you do a whole lot of things okay, but you don't really do anything good. You know what I mean? That can happen in all different parts of life. And sometimes when you clear out the clutter, or when you look at it and say, what's the value of these things compared to the value of this thing in my life? And you say, okay, I'm going to put my focus on this then. Well, that's what I did. I sold the other dealerships, kept Toyota, and within a matter of a few years, turned the Toyota dealership into something, wow, that's interesting, you got a light on here. Turned the Toyota dealership into something large enough that it was valued at more than all of the dealerships combined back when there were 10 of them, of which Toyota was one of the 10. So think about that. That one of 10 became worth more than all of the 10. And that's what took place with Toyota. Like I say, it became number one in Utah in volume. We then started to put a focus on, okay, how do we now really take it to the next level? In business, a lot of times they'll refer to this as critical mass. When you have enough going, enough momentum going, that you now have the ability, if you are, I don't know, I guess it's sort of like a boxer. In a fight, there are those who will back off when their opponent is starting to get woozy, and then there are others that will go in for the kill. We decided to go in for the kill. But our version of going in for the kill wasn't boxing and hurting people. Our version of going in for the kill was deciding that we were going to become what we referred to as the Nordstrom of auto dealerships. Now, auto dealerships didn't really have a whole lot of Nordstrom going on, if you know what I mean. But we decided that we were going to start doing things in such a way that people would have the most incredible experience when they bought a car at our place, that it would cause them to want to come back again and again and again. I'll just jump forward and say, we ended up becoming the number one Toyota dealership in the entire United States in what they call customer retention, which is the percentage of repeat customers that you have. Customer loyalty. People who buy not just one car, but 2 and 3 and 4. We were number one in the entire country. And let me give you a couple of stories. I want to tell you just a couple of examples of how that happened. So first off, I felt like in order to pull off something at that level, that we would need to have really good employees who were really bought in and engaged. And I felt like in order to do that, that they had to feel like I was in it with them, and that we were a team, and that there was kind of almost an endearment that took place. And so I made the decision that I was going to start calling every one of my employees or visiting them personally on their birthday and on the anniversary of their hire date. So if you were one of my employees, I'd come up to you and say, man, happy birthday. I appreciate all you do for my company. But then it went one step further, because before I came and talked to you, I talked to your boss and I said, hey, tell me what's going on with his, did his wife have a baby? Is his kid in a soccer match? I mean, tell me what's happening. So now it's like, hey, happy birthday, man. I understand your wife just had a baby. And you're like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, man, thanks. I appreciate all you do for me. Thanks for being part of the team. How much did that cost me? Nothing. How much did it gain me? Everything. And then I would do the same thing on the anniversary of your hire date. Wow, man, thanks for another year. How many years has it been now? Whoa, 15? Really? Wow, that is great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being part of the team. That kind of thing. And all of a sudden, everybody was just kind of like endeared to it and involved, and they believed that we could be number one. And we did. We then had opportunities to put it to the test. And by the way, I should mention also that in addition to the calling on birthdays and anniversary dates, I would go out. This was back in the day where we had paychecks. Now it later shifted over to where it was direct deposit, but whatever version of compensation, even when it went to direct deposit, I wanted to have a receipt that I could hand to you. So whether I was handing you a check or a direct deposit receipt, so that I could say, here's your compensation. Thanks you for what you're doing for my company. I really appreciate it. Because ultimately that's what the whole thing is about, is you're working for me and I'm paying you for doing what you're doing. But, and shouldn't I say thanks? How often is that happening in today's world? Where the business is saying, thank you. In addition to this pay, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. So you can appreciate what the feeling was with the employees in the place, and they felt good about working there. So then it comes time to put it to the test. So I'm in Cabo San Lucas with a group of my employees, because that was one of the other things we did. There was a joke that people would say, if you go to work for Brent Brown, you better get a passport quick, because you're going to be going on some trips. And yep, so to the best managers and people that had performed well, we'd take them on these trips. And I'm down in Cabo San Lucas, and it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. We're sitting by the pool, and my phone rings. And guess where it's coming from? It's coming from probably the most distinctive thing we did, because I got tired of customers having a problem at my dealership, coming in, and my employees giving them the runaround. And so I finally said, you know what? I'm going to get a hold of this. So I went out and bought plastic, old school, red telephones, hooked them up, put them in the showroom, put them in the service waiting area, and got them connected to where if you picked up the receiver, it automatically rang to my cell phone. So if you're having a problem at one of my dealerships, pick up the phone, you're on with the owner. Man, it worked like gangbusters. I got phone calls for the first 6 months or so, and each time I would solve the person's problem, and then I would go to the employee and say, why didn't you solve that problem? You could have done what I did. And next time, please do this. And if it happened again, then I'd kind of make it clear that there probably wouldn't be a next time. But usually that wasn't the case. After 6 months or so, the call volume started getting really low. I wasn't getting very many calls, except for occasionally from a person who picked up the phone. Yeah, I just wanted to see if this actually worked. I just bought a car from your place, and holy cow, that was the best experience I've had ever buying a car. Thank you. Those were the kind of calls I started getting. So here we are on a Sunday afternoon in Cabo San Lucas, and the phone rings, and pull it out, and it says, Toyota red phone. Okay, first red flag. We're not open on Sundays. I'm like, what? How's this possible? I thought, sure, it had to have been a janitor that knocked the receiver off of the phone, and then it was ringing at my phone. But I thought, I better not just assume that. I better go ahead and pick it up. So with a group of my managers right there with me, we're all in swimsuits, laying out, getting some sun. I'm like, hello, this is Brent Brown. How can I help? Yeah. I'm here to get my plates. I thought, what? He says, yeah, I'm here to get my license plates. I bought a car from you a couple of weeks ago and got a little postcard that said my license plates were in, and so I wanted to pick them up. I said, you're at the dealership? Well, yeah, I'm standing right here by your receptionist counter, but nobody's here. I don't know where that girl is. She's usually here. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So I said, so you're inside? Well, yeah. I said, okay, sir, can you hold for just a moment? I say to one of my managers who's sitting there, call whoever is the closest to the dealership and get him on the phone as quick as you can. So with me on this one phone, them on that phone, we get a person who's one of our managers who happens to live close to the dealership to get to the dealership, get this guy his plates. Not only did she give him his plates, she goes out, bolts them on. In less than 10 minutes, this guy's driving away with his plates on his car. So, in less than 10 minutes, here's a guy who calls and talks to the owner of a company on a day that the dealership isn't even open, and the owner happens to be in a foreign country, and the guy gets his problem solved in less than 10 minutes. That's the Nordstrom of car dealerships. That's when you have it dialed in. So then, the next story I want to tell you, and this was really I felt like this was one of our defining moments. When I'm also out of town, and I was out of town a bit. Sorry, I'll admit it. Anyway, but not in the beginning I wasn't. But so I get a phone call. Brent, we have a bit of a problem. There's a customer who says that his son's girlfriend bought this Volkswagen Jetta used car from us, and he is just furious. Says he's saying the car is just a piece of junk and there's all these problems with it, and he wants us to fix them. I said, well, why aren't we fixing them? And first off, why did we have them fixed before we sold it to him? Because we put all of our cars through a complete, exhaustive service check. And he said, well, therein lies the problem. He says, we've never owned this car. I said, what? He says, yeah, I've checked the records. He said, I even went into the accounting office, and I can't find any record of this car ever having come through our dealership. We never wrote a check for it. It never made it into our service department. I don't find anything on this one. I'm like, wow. Okay, let me talk to the guy again. So I get the guy on the phone, and I said, so let me make sure I've got this correct. Your son's girlfriend came in and bought the car from us. Well, yeah. And he's getting a little annoyed. And I said, so, all right, tell me a little bit more. And he's saying, yeah, and they told us this and blah, 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 and it's not the car they told us it was and all that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I remember hearing that. All right, let me talk to my manager one more time. Hand the phone to him. I said, all right. Manager's name was Kelly. Just, Kelly, take the car into the service department and get all these things that he's saying fixed. And then once that's fixed, take it back to the detail shop and have them clean it the best they can clean it, inside out. Once they're done, take it down, fill it with gas, and then give it to the guy. Call him up, tell him it's ready, and give it to him. There's this silence on the other end of the phone. He's like, Brent, you realize we never owned this car, right? I said, yeah. But remember how we talk about being the Nordstrom of car dealerships? I said, yeah. I said, You remember how the story is that somebody brought a used tire to Nordstrom and wanted to return it? I said, well, this is your tire. Go get it done. He's like, okay, boss, I'm on it. So he takes the car, puts it into the shop, gets everything fixed, all cleaned up, fills it with gas, calls the guy up, he comes, gets the car. That's that. 2 days later, I get a phone call. Mr. Brown, you know, I talked to my son's girlfriend, and apparently we didn't buy that car from you. I said, yeah, I pretty much knew that. He said, what? He said, you knew that? I said, yeah, we checked every record and we couldn't find it. And then he stops me and he says, you didn't even sell us this car, and you treated me better. You treated me better than I've ever been treated at any car dealership. And then he said, I'll never buy a car from anybody else. Okay, that was a good piece of magic. But then he kicked in the next one, what's even better. And he said, and I'm going to tell everybody I know this story. And I was like, yes. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part was it went through my employees like wildfire. Wildfire. Went through with every employee. Did you hear what Brent did? Oh my gosh. We didn't even own the car. And it literally, I could not have done anything that would have solidified the culture better than that. So that's why I say to you, if you're going to do something big in life, whether it's you're going to own a company, or whether it's you're going to go out on a date tonight, or whether it's you're going to, whatever it is, you darn well better be distinctive. Because life demands that you stand out from the crowd if you want to be at the top of the crowd. You've got to do it differently. And you've got to think it out. And it doesn't always involve paying more, or, you know, a lot of times it's just being a little bit more creative. So obviously you can see, I hope, from what I've told you here, you can see why we then naturally just became the #1 volume dealership, the #1 in the whole United States in customers buying again and again. Oh my goodness, they were telling people everywhere around. To the point where on our advertising, I'd say people are driving from all over Utah and beyond to come to Brent Brown Toyota, because they were. The crazy thing is that people were driving past 3 and 4 other Toyota dealerships to get to us. Why would they do that? Because we were distinctive. And at least in their minds, they sure felt like we were. And the best thing was, as soon as they got there, they believed it, because we were. We acted like we were. That's another big problem, is if you go out and do advertising and marketing and tell the world that you're this, and people come in and in the first 30 seconds they see you're not that, you just wasted a lot of money and they'll never believe you again. So you got to make sure that your house is in order, so to speak. Now, in closing, I'm going to ask you, if you were the owner of that company that I just described, and you decided you were going to retire, and you're putting a price on it, what are you going to price it at? All the money, right? Top dollar. Because here's the deal. The typical Toyota dealership, out of every 100 cars they were selling, 31 of them were to prior customers, past customers. And they had to go out and advertise and market and spend all kinds of money and everything to get that remaining, 69 people. At our dealership, 69.2% of our customers had bought a car from us in the past. 69.2%. More than double the average Toyota dealer, and #1 in the country. So when it came time for me to put the price on the dealership, you best be sure it was a big number. because I said, look, Mr. Buyer, you have a built-in insurance policy here. You've got almost 70 people out of every 100 coming in just because you're the company that they trust. So guess what happened? They paid me the all-time record price ever paid for an auto dealership in the state of Utah, and they demanded that I let them keep my name on it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was like, yeah, you can do that. I'm not going to be using it. But you can see from their standpoint, they wanted to be able to have continuity, right? If you were the buyer, would you go put some other name on it? Of course not. You're not going to take that chance. So it's still today called Brent Brown Toyota. And I get to enjoy more time in Cabo San Lucas and not even be there. But that's how it works if you do it the right way. Okay. Now, for real in closing, make sure I didn't miss anything. I'm going to really shift gears here. And I'm going to thank my wife, not just for sitting on the front row and bringing her parents, but for inspiring me to say what I'm about to say. And just hang with me on this part. So, in the Bible, in Proverbs, chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, it says the following. It says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Okay, now, some of you already have checked out and said, trust in the Lord, what is this? Is this a church meeting? Okay, I'm going to say, pull the word Lord and put the word universe in. Trust in the universe. Those of you who are pretty savvy probably know that God is the universe. But still, just call it the universe. But trust in something greater than you. That's what I'm really trying to say. And lean not to your own understanding. I cannot emphasize that last part more. Because many of you will go out of this room and at points in your life have the opportunity to do something great. And you'll talk yourself out of it. You'll sit there and you'll stew on it. And you'll talk to other people and they'll tell you, you can't do that. And you look yourself in the mirror and you go, oh man, that's just going to be too hard. I don't think I can do that. But I want to tell you, trust in a power greater than you. And then don't talk yourself out of it. Don't lean unto your own understanding. Don't let yourself get bogged down with all the reasons that it can't happen, that it can't work, that it doesn't make sense. Obviously, do your due diligence. But don't be afraid to go for it. Don't be afraid to run at bullets. Don't be afraid to be distinctive and do what other people do, or what other people don't do. Lean not unto your own understanding. And then the next line is, in all thy ways acknowledge him. Whatever that greater power is you choose. The point there is that if you go out and you trust in that greater power and you do a great job of not leaning to your own understanding, and then you proceed to go out and say, yeah, look what I did. Look what I got done. Darn rights, man. I made it happen. I made this much money, blah, 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 blah. Does that sound like, in all thy ways acknowledge him? No, that sounds like, in all thy ways acknowledge you. Right? So if you can do that, and if you can go out, and you can give credit where credit's due, and trust in a greater power than yourself. And stop thinking that you have all the power yourself, because you don't. Then there's a promise. At the very end it says, and if you do that, he'll direct your paths. I feel so fortunate in my life to have been able to make it, to where I am. I've tripped up. I've had difficult times. I've had difficult times in business. I've had difficult times in personal life. But I always figured out how to pull myself up and go for it. And I hope that each of you will find a way to believe in yourself, but to realize that there's a greater power than just you, to not let yourself get talked out of stuff that you could do, it is your absolute destiny to be great. You'll do things, you'll invent things, you'll accomplish things that we haven't even been able to dream of. And if you do it right, your path will be directed. Thank you. Okay. Looks like we have 10 minutes for questions. Anybody got one? Yes, in the back there. Yeah, first off, I had to make sure that I had my managers on board. I was to have, I had 675 employees at one point, and to get all of those people on the right culture, it's just a big, too big of bites. But I felt like I could get 25 or 30 managers dialed in pretty well. And then when it came time to get the large group, I brought in a consulting, not a consulting firm, no. I brought in an outside firm that knew how to have the kind of meetings and get people engaged and people goal setting and that kind of thing, and it dialed it in really well. But we had to continually remind of the culture, but almost most importantly, as the owner, and then you required of your managers, they can't miss. And you can't, especially you. For me, as the face of the company, I could not be selectively on the culture and off. Whether I agreed or whether I liked it or not, I described it to my wife a couple of days ago that as I would open the door of the dealership, I stepped onto a stage. And I had to play the role. And the culture was a huge part of that. And so whether it fit what I would have done at home or whatever, I had to stay with it so that nobody felt like there was any deviance. There was another question. Yes. Yes. Well, I really wish I could tell you that I started on like April 17th of 2008 and stayed with it until today. Man, I wish I could tell you that. But the truth of it is that I grasped it, and then I would forget. And then I would grasp it, and then I would forget. And wow, this is digging deep here. But when the world is telling you, and all your peers are telling you that you're the best. I mean, Time Magazine picks me out as the #1 in the whole Western United States. Ernst & Young picks me out as Utah's Entrepreneur of the Year. And you go home from those and you look in the mirror and go, you know, I'm kind of the stuff. You know, I think I kind of used a different word there, but yeah. Anyway, and you start to convince yourself, yeah, I think I got this figured out. And you forget. And so, yeah, there were periods. And so I've had to reaffirm that in my life of saying, no, I'm not everything that they're saying. Yes, I've accomplished a whole lot, but I still need that help. And so, and each of us go to a greater source in a different way. But I guess what I would say is, I hope that you just don't forget that you're not the greater source. If you're the greatest source that you know, you got a tough road ahead of you. You know, and you got to know that there's a lot of people who are in that position. They really believe that they're as good as it gets, you know, and everything that's happening good is because of what they're doing. Okay, I just hope that you'll find a way sometime in your life, hopefully earlier on, to realize that maybe there's more to it. But thanks for asking. Any other questions? More? Yes. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that dealing with the manufacturers and dealing with the employees, such a challenge because everybody's different. And so, for instance, where Toyota, for instance, is super customer serviced, customer oriented, and another manufacturer that I represented, maybe not so much. And so I would be trying to get them, like if I've got a customer who's come in with a car that has a 36,000 mile warranty and they come in with 38,000 miles and the transmission's out. Okay, Toyota, it would take 10 seconds for them to say, all right, we're going to do the right thing, even though the warranty has expired, you know, he's over by 2,000 miles, we're going to pay for it. With other manufacturers, I'd have to be, come on, are you kidding me? You're going to make this guy pay for it and he's only 2,000, you know, and I'd have to, you know, kind of convince them, move them from point A to point B as why they needed to do it differently. But yeah, and then with employees, oh my goodness, that was like all over the map. You know, this dealership has all this rah-rah, you know, this one's kind of not doing quite as well, and so you're working all the different dynamics, but yeah, the different ones. Yes? It's a great question, and some of it is that you have to be willing to get to know your people well enough that you know somewhat of what their potential is, and that you can identify what their strongest suits are, and then you really you make a lot of noise about those, you know, and you commend them for that aspect of what they're doing. But then, of course, as a leader, you then try to put them in positions that that use those talents, that type of thing. But developing people, man, it is everything in a company like that. And the thing you got to realize also is that all of your, we'll call it moves or initiatives, or, you know, you're going to take this employee and put him in this position. It doesn't always work. The key, though, is if it doesn't work, you don't lose them. You find a different way to be able to then capture them and save them and so on. Because a lot of places, a lot of companies, they'll try somebody and they'll put them into this position. It doesn't work and they just fire them. And they're lost. You've now lost all of that investment that you made in their time and training and everything. And so, yeah, I think a whole lot of it falls onto the leader of being able to identify the skills and identify where that person would best flourish. You see what I mean? All right? Okay, I, I'm going to tread lightly on this one. I'm going to answer it in two different ways. First off, if I'm hiring for a technical position, so on and so forth, I'm going to be really focused on their education and training and, and credentials and all that kind of thing. But if I'm hiring somebody, for instance, on sales or maybe like sales management, man, I don't even ask that person about a diploma. I'm like, what have you done in your life? Tell me every bit of experience. What would you do about this situation? If this happened, how would you approach this? Tell me what you did. Matter of fact, what did you do after high school, for instance, that where you went and showed the world that you were going to be doing something better than everybody else, And I always laugh at one guy. I said, okay, cool. So tell me what, you've mentioned a bunch of strengths here. I mean, you've told me a bunch of things that you're really good at. What's a weakness? The guy goes, kryptonite. I'm like, what? And I finally figured out what he meant. He's like, I'm Superman. The only weakness I got is kryptonite. I hired him. I was like, dude, you're amazing. But anyway, a lot of it's a gut feel. But in a technical position, it's very much what the credentials are. So two different things. Yes? Pardon? What did I learn from my employees? So much. I made regular practice of not making a really big decision until I brought a cross-section of the employees who that decision would affect. I would bring them in and discuss it. Open forum. And I can't even tell you how much I gained from being able to get the input of those people who would, and most of the time, not very often, once in a while I'd pull rank and say, you know what, I'm just going to do it this way. But most of the time, after I sat down with a cross-section of people who could give me a good idea of how this would impact them and how they would feel and how they would operate and so on, I would then make the decision based off of that. But good question, thanks. Any other questions? How about one more? Make it a good one. Don't be scared. Go for it. Yes. That was one where I was not a workaholic. And I told all of my employees, I'm glad you asked this question, because it was something that I felt really good about as a business owner, a manager, all the things that I did, is I made it really clear with my employees that I didn't respect workaholics. And I used to use as my own personal, evaluation, it would be the summer party or the Christmas party where I would go up and meet the spouse or significant other of my employee. And at that point, that's the moment of truth. When I'm like, hey, how you doing? I'm either that dirty, rotten scoundrel that makes her husband have to stay at work all these ridiculous hours and all that stuff, or I'm the great guy who provides this wonderful lifestyle that they have and enjoy a nice home. You see what I mean? And so from my standpoint, I would say to managers and employees, don't you do this workaholic thing, and I don't want the blood on my hands. So nobody's going to be impressed here if you're skipping a vacation or working really, really long hours. For me personally, I would literally, as soon as I walked out of the door, I was off of work. When I walked in, I was so full tilt, it was crazy. But I had a real ability. I think I mentioned that attitude of when I walked through the door, it was stepping on a stage. Well, it was just as much when I walked back out the door, I was stepping off of the stage. And, but yeah, if you let yourself become a workaholic or let it be all-consuming, you will pay the price. But also, if you decide to take that too far and decide you're not willing to work hard, you'll pay that price too. Having the balance that you bring up, that's the sweet spot. But you've got to manage it personally first and then require your people to do the same. All right, everybody, I really have appreciated you being here this evening. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope it was worth your while. Thanks.
Stay up here. Okay, Brent, thank you so much. That was just awesome. You covered all the key points we teach in our entrepreneurship courses in our class, and we have this gift for you for driving all the way up here.
Thank you.
And let's thank him once again. It took him 2.5 hours to get up here today, and we're thrilled. So thank you very much. We now have Aggie ice cream out in the hallway, so you're welcome to stay as long as you want and mingle and meet others. Thank you. We'll see you next week.